Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone that's out there listening to our podcast and watching it today. My name is Mark Sauls from OpsDel3000, and my guest today is going to be Linsey Stephan, and she is going to give us her perspective on what it means to be a game changer in her own personal life, in her business ventures, and in her interactions with people. I met Lindsey just a few weeks ago through a mutual contact. So it's a pleasure to have her here today. Also being someone from the country that I'm from South Africa, there's bound to be a lot to talk about because South Africans need a plug to be shoved in their mouths to stop talking sometimes. So for a change, it's not going to be me talking. It's going to be Lindsey. So Lindsey, thank you and welcome. It's been a pleasure. It's a pleasure having you here today. Tell us what it's been like for you in terms of being a game changer in your own personal life. We can start there and then move into other directions later.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Mark, for having me on your podcast today. And it's really, really a privilege. Where does one begin to tell the story, as they say? So just perhaps a little bit of my background, would that help?
Yeah, that'll help.
Great, yeah. So I have been consulting for the last 28 years in the field of human resources and organizational development. So that's really where I found my spot. Started off really, I did women's development training in the early days where I really had a passion for women's development. And that was led me to finding out where we could actually help others when it came to organizational development and what that meant. So I found myself joining an organization called the Pacific Institute in 1997, so when dinosaurs roamed, and was really privileged to be able to experience the real game changer around why change fails. Because that's really what vexed me for the beginning of my career. It didn't matter really what we were putting in, whether it have been in those days strategy, policy, procedure, all those kind of things, because HR was really new in those years, almost like a Cinderella, and nobody knew what to do with HR. But what I found was that all we were doing was really putting a Band-Aid over the crack, and that the change wouldn't last. And I think that's true today more than ever before, if we really see how far we've come. So that's really my history and my career. I then, with the Pacific Institute, went into organizations changing culture, because that's really where it landed. That it didn't matter what needed to change in the organization. If the culture didn't support that change, it wouldn't happen. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah. There's been a few lady guests that I've had on my podcast, and there's a recurring theme there, and it's about what women experience in their professions, the sort of biases and whether they're unconscious bias or intentional biases or discrimination or whatever you want to call it. It's something that's been going on for a very, very long time and in so many different places. And to be honest, it's exhausting listening to the fact that we're still talking about this in 2024. People have said all kinds of things. They've put it up in lights. They've created checklists and policies and conferences and action groups and all kinds of things. But the bottom line is, you mentioned something there around organizational culture and putting a Band-Aid over a wound, and you couldn't have said it any better. What do we need to do to actually get some proper action here, to get some real results and stop hiding behind policies and checklists? And, so when someone goes to court or is dealing with a grievance, they can pull up this checklist and say, well, look, we've done all this stuff, so we've done nothing wrong. It's not about that. It's about actually bringing about real change. What do we need to do, to make sure that these policies and checklists and whatever we want to call them actually become a real thing that bring about real change and not just something people can hide behind?
Yeah, really spot on there, Mark, because, so much seems to change and yet nothing changes. And, over my career and my experience of working with organizations, I mentioned that it's the culture that would actually determine how people push through some of the challenges that they face across the whole spectrum of organizational life. And when you really drill down deeply into the culture, one actually finds that you can't ignore the fact that it's leadership and leadership's impact on that culture of how people respond is
Yeah.
really where it all sits. So coupling that all to the way we treat each other, because I think as human beings, we all know how we want to be treated.
Mm.
And so when creating an organizational performance culture based on the beliefs we have, that then impact on our thinking, that impact on our behavior, and then our performance is really where it actually resides.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many different, I listen to, I've got a few mentors, and, some of those mentors are in the form of, people that do podcasts. One of them is an actual person that I meet once a month or so for, guidance and, in terms of leadership and how to run a business and things like that. Have you got any mentors that you've worked with, or any role models? They don't have to be people you've actually had personal associations with, but are there any people that you actually follow in terms of developing your own mindset?
Yeah, great question. I'm almost like a sponge, constantly looking for those people that have insight is really where I find myself most times. So searching constantly, looking for those pearls of wisdom that actually take the complexity out of life. So, how does one make the complex simple, and how
Mm,
does one make the intangible tangible? So those are the people I look for. I've been really privileged, Mark, to have had the likes of a couple called Lou Tice and Diane Tice, who were the founder members of the Pacific Institute, of which I belong. And it was just really the most amazing experience of being able to meet people like the Gary Lathans, the Martin Seligmans, and so many others that have actually shaped cognitive psychology as such.
mm,
And then the Michael Gervais of the world is somebody else that I follow with interest. But yeah, I think as I sit here now, I thought, oh, maybe my list is getting a bit too long, but there are many. So that's
yeah.
really the field that it's obviously in my field. But then there was one particular man by the name of Brian Wegley, who that's really how I started at the Pacific Institute. Was he asked me to come and evaluate the program called Investment and Excellence because he wanted to buy the company. And so that was really a wonderful experience where he had worked with the likes of Peter Senge, and they had put together a strategy around the health and wealth of systems. And
Mm,
so that's really where I've delved into understanding the mystery of that, really. So whether you were an engineer or whoever, you actually all dealt with systems. So just as
mm,
much as that there was a reason and a root cause why a building would fall down, when dealing with social systems, there was also a root cause as to
mm.
why a social system would either thrive or not survive.
Yeah.
So
And that brings us, sorry, go ahead.
I've had lots of buddies like that in my life who influenced my thinking.
Yeah. So, when it comes to things like social systems, you mentioned earlier when we first started this that, it's about looking into what have we done in an effort to bring about change. It doesn't matter what that change is. How many times do we succeed, and why do we have such either a low percentage rate of success or high percentage rate? And root cause analysis, what's causing the change initiative to stall or fail? Now, the social aspect of their social systems, as you just mentioned, that's it's something that I think gets ignored many times, or maybe not ignored. People are probably just completely oblivious to the fact that there are social systems that cause things to fail. What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, so I think that's why change fails. because there's certain ingredients that aren't in place, or we could call them pillars, for example, that are just not in place. If they are in place, then the organization, the team, or the individual will thrive. So this applies to the me, the we, and the us.
Yeah.
And so there are some of those elements that if they exist, you will thrive. If they don't, then there's a struggle. And just, would you like me to share some of that information that I
Yeah,
have,
please.
or
Yeah.
theories that I have? So there are really 6 areas that we would need to consider based on the fact that if you look at events happen, and they happen one at a time, and they come and they go, and that's fine. And then we start to see events start to form patterns. And these patterns start to produce some of the same old, same old, same old. And we throw money and we throw time and we throw effort at trying to fix these patterns, and yet nothing seems to move them. And so that would really be an ideal example of how do we then take a deeper look and almost start to unpack the whys around what's happening in the system. So an example that I always use is as an event, mommy and daddy fight. But they fight now and again, and it's okay. We understand it's human nature. But then we find mommy and daddy fight often. And then they fight really often, and particularly the last Friday night of every month is really a bad one. So then, as a child in that household, I keep on saying, please stop fighting. But, that doesn't help. So the best thing I can do perhaps is remove myself from the family, so stay with a friend on the last Friday night of every month, for example. So that's just a social example there, that if there's something happening, what can we do to fix it, as opposed to throwing interventions that don't work.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening and joining this podcast. My name is Mark Sauls from OpsDel3000, and I have produced a course that will change your leadership journey and take you towards success in a much more holistic way. My course gives you practical applications of the different leadership principles and also gives you an experience of journaling your journey so that you can reflect upon it and make adjustments as you go along. There are many millions of leadership courses out there. Mine is based on the successes of very successful leaders and also the hardships that they came across. It also documents my own leadership experience, my journey from the shop floor into a senior leadership position, the mistakes I made, the learnings that I took from those mistakes, and the superpowers that I developed from them. I say superpowers because they're really simple, but they are absolutely life-changing in terms of your leadership journey. So I do encourage you to take the course, complete it, and get your certification at the end of it. Now, I'm also the author of 2 books, So Many Ways to Get What You Want and The Traits of Successful Leaders. These 2 books not only give you the tools for becoming a successful leader, but they also go into great depth in terms of influence and persuasion, which is a much overlooked tool in the leadership realm. Now, thank you for listening. Please do take the opportunity to read the books and do the course. Now let's get back to the podcast.
So the 6 pillars that we've really worked with over the years, and as I said, this applies to a me, a we, and an us context, is first of all purpose.
Yes.
And, what's actually going on behind all these areas, these events, and these patterns. And it is based on things like principles, values, and really answering the basic question of, if you're asking it about yourself personally, why do I exist? If you're asking it about your team, or the team you belong to, is why do we exist? And then, of course, as an organization, then we would apply the question, why do we exist, to do what? And so that would be the first pillar, that if we can define these so carefully and accurately, would we be able then to describe for ourselves, what are we good at? And so what then, as an inside look at, what are we gifted, talented at, knowledgeable at, what's our expertise? But there's an extra added thing in this pillar, which is called UEVP, which is a unique economic value adding proposition. And the difference lies in the E. So what I mean by this would be you're gifted and talented and knowledgeable and you got experience. However, if you look a little closely at are you economically viable,
mm,
then you'd be able to see if you could link in carefully with your purpose and
yeah,
your reason for existing. So
yeah,
an example is I have a friend who's an artist and she really is very talented, but she spends every Sunday at Artists in the Park and doesn't sell a thing.
yeah,
So, that would be something that you're putting all your energy and effort into something. And yet, what is the economic driver? So,
yeah,
when unpacking that, we would actually then start to link to that it's a combination of skill, talent, gifting, experience, knowledge, but also what actually brings in the economic value adding proposition
mm,
for it to
mm,
coexist. The other pillar that we would look at as a root cause would be personal mastery. If you're looking at personal mastery in terms of the resilience, the determination, the presence of your self-talk,
mm,
things like that, what actually drives you to be able to bounce back from situations, or how you then start to put all the pieces together of being able to search for the truth that you're looking for, and then how to respond to those circumstances in that situation. And then the other pillar would be relationship arrangements. So,
mm,
how do we arrange ourselves? There's almost always a distribution of something when it comes to relationship arrangements, whether it be a distribution of justice, work, fairness, money, whatever. There's
mm,
something that always comes to be in
yeah,
terms of that system between. So this is where we work and start to move from the system within, which is the me, to the systems between, which would be the people that you react to. Or if you're looking at it in an application for organizations, then that would really mean that what are the systems that need to talk to each other that make up the whole to produce the economic value adding proposition around the purpose. So if you hear my words now, I'm starting to link all those pillars together
yeah,
to find itself in the space of the other pillar, which is time and space. The question here is, are we applying our minds to each one of the pillars, the
mm,
purpose, the uniqueness, the personal mastery, the relationship arrangements, and starting to find ways in which to break through in those areas. And then lastly, the other last pillar, the sixth pillar, would be a structured process. And that structured process would literally mean a structured process to cause alignment or breakthrough.
mm,
So, coming back to the personal example of mummy and daddy fight, what would we need to do to apply all those six elements that would be give us an answer? Now,
yeah,
all six need to be in place, maybe, but it could be just three or
yeah,
two that we can start to work on. And that's where that root cause analysis of a social system starts to come in. And a classic one that I can use now is communication. Everybody talks about the lack of communication. So if we use those six elements to diagnose the health and wealth of that system, communication could be because we don't know why we're communicating. So that's the
mm,
purpose part.
mm, mm,
It could be our relationship arrangements are really tricky and sticky.
mm,
It could also be that there's no structured process to actually cause that alignment and breakthrough in that
yeah,
communication. So then, as a team or as a leader, I can start to use this analysis and root cause understanding of what's wrong with my system and where can I start to fix it.
yeah. Yeah, that's a really, even while you were talking, I always try and keep that voice in my head quiet when someone is talking so I can listen effectively. And I managed for about 90% of that. But you said some things that really resonated with me and took me on a slight tangent. And it took me into a place where, because I put together literally hundreds of flat packs, because since I came to the UK so many years ago, I realized that doors are not as wide as some places in Southern Africa. So if you buy a three-seater leather settee or something, you're not going to be able to bring it in the door because the door doesn't accept it. So, and wardrobes and things like that. So it's a flat pack culture. You're going to get lots of flat pack things over here because that's the only way you're going to get it in. But why am I talking about that? Because when you start putting flat packs up, I've done this myself many times. You start putting it up, and being an engineer, we don't like to follow instructions. We just like to look at everything there and decide that we can do it without reading anything. And, you get to 99% done and you realize, well, I can't finish this now because there's one piece here and it doesn't fit in this remaining gap. So it must fit somewhere else. And then you end up having to take the whole thing apart to put that thing in because you haven't followed a structure and a process. And when you mentioned that to me, that's it took me to that point in my mind. No doubt I've said this, but I'll still do the same thing again at some point because we like to prove to ourselves that we can do things without instruction. When it comes to game changing and everything that you've mentioned here, from an organizational point of view, it sounds very similar to something called the McKinsey 7S model, which is something I use. But once what you've mentioned there is something that goes a little bit deeper in terms of the me, we, and the us. The me part, I don't feel is addressed adequately in the McKinsey 7S. What would be the process that you take someone down in determining that me aspect of it?
Right, yeah. And I mean, one word really comes to mind, and it's on everybody's lips right now, but the mind setting. Okay. So, what happens in an organization, particularly where you're needing to come in and change something? You have a whole bunch of me's and a whole bunch of we's contributing to the us's.
Mm.
And the funny thing about it, really, when looking at social systems and the readiness of any system, would be is the me healthy? So, what we know about systems, social systems, is a healthy me creates a healthy we, creates a healthy us. And most times we're trying so hard to reach the goal, which is a performance goal or whatever it may be, and we don't look at the individual.
Yeah.
So an example would be we change systems. So we get in the McKinseys and etc. who come in and change the policies, procedures, systems, etc. The structure as such, and then they leave. And what's happening really is that the very people that need to drive those systems haven't been given an opportunity to actually change as well, to be change ready, to accept what it is. Most times they actually know where to fix the problem.
Yeah.
It's just that they're never given the opportunity to do so. So that's where, the 6 pillars comes in again, is that we would apply those 6 pillars to me individually, if I'm the individual in the team, as to what's my part to play in this team and in this organization, this team's goals, and in the organization's goals as well. And that requires a whole lot of mind setting, which would then look at the purpose, the uniqueness in terms of contribution economically, the personal mastery. What are my relationships like? Is there a structured process? And do I spend time building those relationships and that purpose? So that would be equipping the personal system, the me system, with a strength of character that allows me then to go into interacting with the relationship arrangements part, which would be the systems between. How do we put this together? How do we put this digital transformation together? How do we put this change together? How do we put this together? And, in an agile way, find options and opportunities to be creative and innovative to make it happen purposefully, using our best skill and talent in a very personal mastery way, personal masterful way. And then how do we actually make sure that those relationships and those systems talk to each other to produce the end result, whatever that may be. And so I might be talking a little like airy-fairy, Mark, to answer your question, but it is almost that then that very conversation that I've just had now would then apply to the team. And the team then needs to find ways to align and find breakthrough around their alignment around the common goal the beliefs that we have, the mindsets that we have, and the relationships we hold.
Yeah. Personal mastery is a very, very, very long journey. Well, it is for me anyway. What's I'm not going to ask you for a shortcut because I don't believe there is one. You mentioned the process about personal mastery. What would be the top things that people need to start doing, on that journey to personal mastery?
Yeah, so I think it's a kind of really aligning your purpose, and that's always a difficult thing. Why do I exist? To do what? For or to whom? Are always questions that personal mastery will actually kind of prod and poke you at. And so when it comes to all that, I do believe that if you anchored, particularly morally anchored in principles and values, even as a leader, you would lead better. As an individual, you would be more participative and a contributory, worthy contributor to life as such, or the organization or the team. And inside of that, I would need to take control around my response to everything that happens to me.
Yeah.
And so if I can have that internal locus of control as opposed to the external locus of control, that it's because of my boss or it's because of my situation or my circumstances, I can actually turn that around and look at it in terms of what's my response to this. It will go well with your system as an individual. And so that's where personal mastery starts to tap into all things like self-talk, your worthiness, self-talk cycles and things that you would have. And there's lots of that around now. When I first started it, we didn't have that much, around what that looked like. But now there's a plethora of stuff, and you just need to look and see where everybody's trying so hard to make individuals stronger on the inside so that they can cope with the uncertainty that's unraveling right now.
Yeah, yeah. That's when it comes to taking ownership or taking accountability for your own personal situation. That's something I talk to people a lot about, and it's something I practice as far as as I can in that aspect. Sometimes you find a barrier comes up. Maybe barrier is too much of a strong word. Sometimes some things you bring them within what you think is your sphere of control. You take ownership of it and say, well, the way things are turning out right now in business, in life, relationship wise, friends, family, whatever, I need to take responsibility for that. And if I take responsibility for that, that brings it within my control. But I think there's still a limit there, because some things which are in your control are affected by things that are not in your control, if that makes any sense. Or, I don't know, I might be making an excuse there. What's your view on that?
No, well, I mean, we're faced with the unknown almost every day. And so I think that to me is the most important thing, what you've just said, is what's my response to any set of stimuli that I find myself in, and can I take accountability for the consequences of it? So that's another kind of systems thinking idea, is if you put something into the system, it will have a knock on, and can you actually look at and deal with the circumstances of what that knock on may be?
Yeah.
So we don't really want to overthink things as much anymore as we're inclined to do, because that's also unhealthy. As you just have to speak to all the health gurus now around overthinking and things like that. So I don't want to become too serious around answering your question about that. But yeah, it simply lies in, if it's to be, it's up to me.
Yeah, there's various different groups of people. Some people find solace in making everything about what's happening outside. There's nothing I can do about that. That's well outside of my control. I'm just on the receiving end. It will go where it will go. What will happen will happen. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be, and all this kind of stuff. And it brings people comfort, and each to their own. Everyone has a right to decide on how they are going to live their lives. Personally, I like to take things into my own charge, make myself responsible for things, and then realize, what am I actually responsible for and what am I not responsible for, and also take control of my environment. Sometimes, or in many cases, your environment affects the way your mindset works, which then affects your behaviors and affects your emotions. And apart from having an effect on yourself, it has an effect on other people around you as well. So in a business perspective, self-awareness is key, because, you could go to work in a certain mindset or a certain frame of mind and affect other people, and therefore affect the organizational culture and health. When it comes to moving out of environments or associations, I mean, I know many people from different countries, and I think we categorize them in different places in terms of how they fit into our life. Are these solution seekers? So, when I'm in a solution-based mindset, I'm going to hang around with those people because we're probably going to come to solutions together many times. If I'm in a complaining mood, I'll probably sit around with 5 or 6 people that I know are going to complain about everything and make me feel better because I'm not in that boat on my own. So, those are the kind of associations that we have with people. In terms of being a game changer, where would your direction lie?
I'd say the goal setting is the most important. So, what is it that you want, truly want? Who do you want to surround yourself with? And just based on the notion of some neuroscience that comes out right now, is that you move towards and become like that which you think about. Your present thoughts determine your future. And so you would attract the right people because you're goal orientated, or you're moving towards that which is important to you. And that's really simply, Mark, where I take that, is do things on purpose, not by accident. And then surround yourself with people that are like-minded and that can help you in the achievement of your goals. That's where I've really been, as I said, privileged to have been surrounded by people who have helped me along my way. Because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have achieved what I have achieved. And so, yes, I trust that answers your question. But it's hard. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But it's that single-minded, focused, purposeful, knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, and then having all those elements of determination, resilience, perseverance that become your best friend, and then you form the relationships that will work for you and grow you towards where you're wanting to go.
Yeah.
That's that. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I think things. I used to be an overthinker, and sometimes I do, and I have to, tap myself on the shoulder and just remind myself that you might call it overthinking, but actually it's procrastination, and it becomes an excuse not to do something, and it just delays everything. So it's part of engineering training is to think carefully about what you do, follow the instructions, follow the manual, do it right first time, and therefore don't give yourself defects to fix afterwards. So, sometimes the overthinking comes from that, because in the absence of clear direction and my life doesn't have a manual. And like you say, sometimes you introduce changes into places and they don't work because while there's a process and a structure for doing things, there's a whole myriad of other variables like people's personalities that are impossible to factor in all the time. So I find that sometimes a good way to do things is do some thought on it, make some sensible decisions, and then start. Because I've met so many different people, including yourself, that have some value to bring in terms of game changing for myself and for people who are listening to this. And I did that just by making one step changes and without trying to map the whole thing out into infinity and beyond, but just 1 or 2 steps at a time, and take feedback from each step, make an amendment where you have to, make an adjustment. And sometimes the things that are not driving you forward fall away on their own without you having to do anything. So you haven't had an uncomfortable conversation with someone. It's just, you just seem to move and gravitate towards other people and other situations. What would you say, Lindsey, has been your biggest driver in terms of your focus on personal development and being a game changer, and just your general view on life?
Your customers love ordering flowers online to gift to their loved ones. With your very own app, they will be able to experience full commerce shopping, which makes purchasing flowers online easier than ever. When buying flowers online, imagery is vital in driving sales. The gallery allows customers to view images using Apple's Cover Flow style navigation. As a florist, just think how exciting it is to be able to create as many galleries as you need to showcase your products. Each gallery will have its own tab, name and icon within the app, making it easy and simple for your valued customers to browse to their heart's content.
I like that one. I'm going to use a phrase, and it's called replacement picture. So life happens, as we know, some of it good, some of it not so good, as we've just described now. And to sit and wallow in what is always the mess and really a bad space to be. And so from a personal mastery point of view, can we quickly become aware of how to fix that? Take stock of what's just happened, identify the current reality as it is. You can paint that picture of what that looks like and unpack it. But at the same time, on purpose, paint the picture of what it would look like if fixed or spectacular or not there. And, that actually helps start to build those new neural pathways that in that replacement picture, let's start to move towards that picture that will make sure that we get out of this mess, or it's a better place to be, or I'm on the road to recovery, or whatever that may be. And I've experienced that personally with a illness diagnosis. I was diagnosed in 2016 with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And if I think back now, if it wasn't for this knowledge and understanding that I have been gained over all the years, I don't think I would have made it, really. I had a stem cell transplant with lots of chemo and things like that. And if I think back now on how I overcame that, it was literally every single day painting a picture of what it would look like if fixed, happy, spectacular, well, whatever that meant for that day in those circumstances. So I've been ever grateful for the Pacific Institute's curriculum that actually taught all the skills around what that needs to do. It needs to be, so it's the awareness around that. And in the awareness, create the acceptance to make action more sustainable in how you paint that picture towards a better place and space.
Yeah, it's always good to hear these things come from someone like yourself who's applied that in a real practical way to something that that's just hard to fathom. Health problems, especially when they're serious health problems, they do have an impact on just listening to it. And it's good to hear that when you apply certain things in such a situation, you can get the kind of results that you've got from that. Unfortunately, to many people, what you've just described is, it's just one of these visualization things again. We keep hearing this it's all over YouTube. There's thousands of people telling us to paint pictures and visualize things and all that sort of stuff. And it's really difficult. And I can tell you, it's very difficult. I've been doing this for a long time. It's always been an interest for me. And on some days, it works really well. And on other days, I can't seem to focus on what I'm doing. I might be trying to paint a picture of something, but my mind takes over and starts painting a picture of something else. And then I have to keep bringing myself back. And that becomes a battle on its own to do. Again, I'm not going to ask for shortcuts because I don't believe there are any. But what's your experience? I mean, it's obviously worked for you well. Do you have any kind of advice to give to people on what they could do to make that experience more productive?
Yeah, so a tough one. It actually is true personal mastery, is how do you manage self in the presence of the unknown? And so I think it's a lot of working on oneself to make sure that you just keep on bouncing back with that resilience factor. So that would be it. And, just a long obedience in the same direction. I think that's a quote from a guy called Eugene Peterson. And I've actually known that is something, been a motto of my life, is just a long obedience in the same direction, because if you're on the right path, it'll all happen for you. And having faith in that.
Mm,
So, there are no easy answers to your question other than to find a methodology that helps.
yeah,
And, the visualization, the manifestation, all those things, the meditation, they all help in some way, shape,
mm,
or form, actually start to create a vibe in you that you can
yeah,
start to move towards that dominant picture, because it's the
yeah,
dominant picture of being well, being happy,
yeah,
abundant feelings, all those kind of things, or understanding that you can start to move towards that picture. But we do know it's in our thinking and in our feeling,
yeah,
that a combination of those two, that we be able to move towards that which we build in our own minds first, and then in reality.
yeah. I like that because there's no single ingredient to making a fantastic dish. It doesn't matter what you're doing. There's a series of a number of ingredients you need to use, and there's a specific process you need to follow. So if it tells you to preheat your oven to 800 and 375, and you preheat it to 370, then you won't get the result that you're supposed to get. So the fact that you mentioned that there are various different aspects that you have to put together. There's no magic pill for anything. It's a vocation. It's something you've got to put time and effort into. And it's like one story or one person that I always remember when I talk about things like this is Roger Bannister. When the doctors and physicians and everyone told him, look, you are trying to do what's impossible. You will never run a mile in less than 4 minutes. And if you do, your heart will blow up before that happens and you will bleed internally to death. So stop this. This is just nonsense. This is never going to happen. And he put in the training every day and, did whatever practice he had to do and came short of that less than 4 minutes so many times, but had that vision that was constant in his mind about this is what it's going to look like when I'm running that mile and I get to it in less than 4 minutes. And, so it wasn't just a visualization, but he did the visualization, he did the training, he had the right diet, he had the right motivation and all that kind of thing in order to accomplish his goal. So thanks for that. It's self-mastery is something that I hope to accomplish one day. I hope I'm still in this dimension when that happens. Who knows, it might happen another time, but it certainly is worth putting the effort into. If you can't put an effort into the me, then you certainly won't be able to put an effort into the we, and the us will suffer as a result of that. So, coming from Southern Africa, where, we both, where we're both from, Southern Africa is, it's a special place because it's just the countries around that area, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, Botswana, Namibia. Apologies if I've forgotten anyone out. But, I've been to every single one of those countries, and each one of those countries has its own special flavor of traditions and customs and doing things. But they also have their own special flavors of challenges. And, South Africa has had its fair share of challenges, and there's been a fair share of progress in terms of where the country is now compared to where it used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago. What do you think was the main ingredient for that, Lindsey?
Well, I think just the human, the reason why we can bring it all together, because as you were talking, I was thinking all of us who have had ups and downs, and particularly if we look at our respective countries and things like that. But what allows us to bounce back time and time again? And so that's where my mind vectored, and I'm thinking, oh shucks, I hope I'm answering the question properly. But I think the ingredients that are almost always in place for, and coming back to the health of those systems, is the human being, the human element. We all know how we want to be treated. I said that earlier.
Yeah.
And so there's a specialness about people in diversity, where we come together to form a union or form a bond where we can make things better on the other side. And I think that characterizes most of the countries you just mentioned now, where if we look where we've come from and where we're going, there's always that element of hope. There's faith, there's just, in the good nature of human beings. And I trust that will always win out.
Yeah, I always I have certain pictures. One picture was when South Africa beat the All Blacks, is something that I will never get out of my memory, in rugby, and became the World Cup champions. And the lead up to that, where the late Nelson Mandela worked with the team, spoke to them, got people on board, and while everybody thought, what is he doing? There's a lot more serious issues in the country, and he's worried about rugby and stuff like that. But it takes a certain vision to look at, what do I need to do to bring people together? What do we have in common? Can we focus on that? And then everything else falls into place. So I do watch that every so often. I think it's disappeared off Netflix now, so I shall have to launch a complaint, because I'll probably watch that about 10 times ever since it's come out. Mm-hmm. So I think it's something that would be good to see. It is in other parts of the world. I've seen it here in the UK many times. I've lived here a long time, and being a foreigner, I've been welcomed by many people, and it's good to feel part of something, and it's good to see that kind of leadership and thinking has. I'm not going to say it started in South Africa, but South Africa gave a very good account of that at that time, and it's good to see that spreading to other parts of the world. So it's been a pleasure, Lindsey. Could I just ask you to give us your contact details and any last comments that you want to make on this podcast? I will put them on the screen anyway after this, but it's just nice for you to be able to give your details on your own.
Oh, good. Oh, well, thank you. So I think I did mention an organization, the Pacific Institute, which has shaped my life dramatically. So you'll find us a global organization with offices all over the world. So just Google the Pacific Institute, you'll find that it all comes into place. But yeah, it's been really a privilege, Mark. Thank you so much for allowing me just to be me and answer your questions and chat about my experience over the last 28 years of being an integral part of helping systems be healthy and wealthy.
Yes, it's been very insightful, Lindsey. And why I like doing these is because it brings different angles and perspectives to people that have probably been practicing similar self-mastery methods, but you always hear something new. I've been doing this for a long time, and every time I have someone as a guest on the podcast, I walk away with 5 or 6 things that I thought, well, you thought you were an expert on that, but you're not, because you now have 6 new things you need to learn. And I think that's what I like about it, is that it's a continuous development process. And so long as you focus on that, I don't think you can go wrong. So once again, thank you, Lindsey, for joining us. Thank you to the audience, to everyone that will watch this podcast. Hopefully we've given you some value, something that you can apply practically in your lives, in your organizations, to bring about meaningful change. And that's the key, meaningful change, not just change for the sake of change, as we sometimes see. So this is Mark Sauls from OpsDel3000 and Linsey Stephan from Pacific Health Institute. Out until the next time. Thank you.